Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So I tend to record a follow-up video to my discussion with Daniel Haqiqatju on the issue of Tawhid and Shirk and the problems with the understanding of Najdi Dawah. The purpose of this short video is going to be to bring about some additional points that I might have glossed over with speed in my original talk, and maybe one or two additional points. And then I will send this to Brother Haqiqatju to basically mention it at the end of the video, along with a link for my channel. So the channel is called Nazarative. Nazar is the reasoning, authentic reasoning that we are all obliged to. And the narrative is taken from English. So the meaning is that we want to push the narrative that is based on authentic reasoning. So let's move on to the first thing that I want to address. It is that it is possible that some of the Wahhabis, when I have pointed out that, one of their major problems was the fact that they did not understand the link between actions and the takfir, they might raise the point that I am discussing this as a Hanafi, and they would just throw around the irja card, or you're a murji'i, right? And they would say, well, we are the Ahlul Hadith, and Ahlul Hadith believe that actions are part of Iman, and Iman goes up and down. If they raise this point, I believe this is a red herring. Why? Because you see, Imam Shafi rahimahullah is from the Ahlul Hadith. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal is from the Ahlul Hadith. Yet none of these ulama had the same opinion as Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab about why or how did the Sahaba understand the issue of the people who refuse to pay the zakat. And the details are in my talk, and I just wanted to put this out that this issue, if someone raises this issue, is irrelevant, and it's not going to help justify the critical flaw in the Najdi theology. The second thing I wanted to clarify or mention is that in the original talk, I criticized Sheikh Auni's understanding. However, there are some areas in the book that I believe Sheikh Auni is correct. And I thought that it's a good idea to also mention those things where he's correct, but I disagree at the end towards his conclusion, even though his starting points are actually correct. Now, one of those points where he has correctly identified the problem with the Wahhabis is that the shirk in i'tiqad has to be rationally impossible, or let's say it has to have some reasonable thing or reasonable feature which points to compromise of Allah Azza wa Jal's rububiyyah or uluhiyyah in my understanding as well. It shouldn't just be a matter of whether someone is alive or someone is dead, whether you're in dunya or you're in hereafter. Because if you believe Allah Azza wa Jal, subhanahu wa ta'ala, has a son, for example, and you say this is Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam or Jesus or anyone else, that would be major shirk. It doesn't matter who you put in that place. It doesn't matter you do it in this dunya or hereafter, or the person who's alive or the person who's dead. It's always major shirk. Okay? Now, why is this relevant? Because I mentioned that Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab believed that the intercession from near the grave is shirk, major shirk. Okay? This is a situation where someone comes near to the grave of someone and asks him to pray to Allah. Now, because of his mujarrad amal kind of perspective, action only perspective, he does not identify with this scenario any other features that would make it qualitatively different than me going to another righteous person and asking him to make dua. So the difference between shirky type of intercession and non-shirky type of intercession, according to Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, is simply a matter of the person being alive or a person being in his grave, which we believe is not rationally sound. And on this issue, it's just not just Hatim Maloni against the Wahhabis, it's us, it's also Ibn Taymiyyah. I didn't touch on Ibn Taymiyyah's views too much in my original talk, but I would say that there is a fundamental level of difference between how Ibn Taymiyyah understands shirk and how Muhammad ibn Wahhab understands. And this example of intercession is a very core example in that regard. So let me show you what Ibn Taymiyyah has to say by sharing my screen. If you see my screen, so first two quotes are from Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab that I already presented in my presentation. Both of them are from Kashf Shubuhat, and both of them give the meaning that he believes that the intercession case is major shirk. And notice that he does not identify what makes that intercession shirky. For him, it's just if you go near the qabr and do this, and this is shirk. Whereas when it comes to Ibn Taymiyyah, he is very keen to identify what exactly makes this case of intercession shirk. For example, he says that in these two quotes, I will just summarize, and you can look it up for yourself, that the belief about the intermediary is that Allah Azza wa Jal loves him so much that his will is compromised, or Allah Azza wa Jal fears the intermediary, or these other kind of compromises of God's will, as well as his statement that one of the beliefs of the mushrikun is that وَأَنَا بَعِيدٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لَا يُمْكِنُنِي أَنْ أَدْعُوَهُ إِلَّا بِهَذِهِ الْوَاسِطَةِ. Right? That I cannot call upon Allah Azza wa Jal except through this intermediary. Okay? So, and then couple this with the fact that Ibn Taymiyyah has many, at least two, three quotations, where he explicitly labels the case of going near the grave and asking the person in the grave to make dua to Allah Azza wa Jal as bid'ah. He doesn't consider this major shirk. This means that Ibn Taymiyyah was keen to identify with the major shirk something that compromises Allah Azza wa Jal's rububiyyah or uluhiyyah. It shouldn't be just a matter of person being alive or dead. And this is a major problem with the Wahhabi theology. However, Sheikh Auni, from this point onwards, even though he motivates this problem correctly, he then makes a conclusion, which is where I tend to disagree with him. His conclusion then goes into the direction where he says that, look, all of these cases of shirk intercession that Ibn Taymiyyah has identified involve khalal in rububiyyah, or as I said, compromise in rububiyyah of Allah Azza wa Jal, compromise in lordship. How? You see, there's a compromise of will of God, right? So Sheikh Auni's argument here until this point is correct, except that he has ignored, or he has, let's say, not taken into account in another scenario of the shirk of intermediaries, right? And this is a fallacy where if you have a selective data input, your conclusions are going to be wrong. So the scenario that he ignores is the scenario where the intermediary doesn't have to be necessarily believe that the intermediary compromises Allah Azza wa Jall's will, and so on and so forth. If you just believe about the intermediary, that this intermediary deserves worship because Allah Azza wa Jal is too sublime and I'm too lowly, or Allah Azza wa Jal is too distant and I'm too far, basically, this conception is called Shirk Taqrib, as Sanusi puts it, and many of the Asharis and Maturidis have mentioned this scenario. Now, this scenario does not involve explicit compromise of God's will or independence or rububiyyah, as Sheikh Auni would understand. It does involve compromise of istiqaq of ibadah. So this scenario and this understanding is going to put us right in the middle, smack in the middle between Najdis and the understanding of Sheikh Auni. The Najdis have their Amal only paradigm, just the differences between the alive and the dead, and that's what makes it shirk. Sheikh Auni's understanding is going to be if it compromises God's will or independence, that would be his perspective. For us, it should involve compromise, but not limited to independence or the will. it can also be a compromise of istihqaq or of ibadah. And we understand ibadah to be the utmost veneration and utmost humiliation. And this definition is not a Taymiyyah definition. This is a misconception. Imam al-Razi has given this definition, and he was before Ibn Taymiyyah, and there are many other Ashari and Maturidi scholars who have defined ibadah in this way or in the understanding of ta'ah and etc. etc. Right? And this shirk of taqrib, this scenario, is a data point that Sheikh Auni cannot explain and his understanding cannot explain. And for this data point is very interesting for Asharis and Maturidis for another reason, that they've always argued that seem or believe that there's a physical size having being up there who's very physically distant from us. It breeds this kind of thinking. So let's go back to our slides to see some interesting quotes as well. This quote that you see on the screen is from Imam Shah Waliullah Ad-Dahlawi from his tafsir Al-Fawz Al-Kabir fi Usul al-Tafsir. It's an Usul al-Tafsir book where he in the start he's describing the errors of the pagans and so on and so on, Munafiqun and these Tawaif that the Quran is refuting. So Shah Waliullah says that they fell into Tatsim and they ascribed tahayyus to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he identifies this as a source of their shirk. And if you go further down, I would quote just As-Sanusi in his Sharaf Muqaddimat. He clearly mentions Shirk Istiqlal as a separate category, and then Shirk Taqreeb and Shirk Taqleed. And what is his understanding of Shirk Taqreeb? That the worship of other than Allah is going to bring them closer to Allah. And if you look at the explanation that Sanusi follows this with, he clearly says that the understanding was that God is too sublime and it is against the adab to reach God. And also Shirkut Taqleed. This is again a very clear indication that according to Sanusi, the worship can have a understanding. It has an understanding that is not dependent on the ma'rifah of the rububiyyah, right? So this wraps up the point that this particular scenario is going to falsify Sheikh Auni's conclusion, and obviously the conclusion of Wahhabis is all anyways wrong anyways, and it basically validates the mainstream Sunni position that okay, shirk has to involve some kind of compromise, but that compromise is not limited to independence or will. It is more general, more a'am than that, right? Another type of compromise that I have always asserted in my, and also in the original talk is of Allah Azza wa Jal's dominance, and that we can identify him and then we can have his ma'rifah. And if you believe some being can have dependent powers to create, to control everything, this makes his ma'rifah impossible, right? And so this is impossibility in this life and also in the afterlife. So I don't believe that, like my understanding of shirk in i'tiqad is that it is impossible and it is consistently shirk in every time and every place. So in Jannah, you're not going to be, you cannot have your own universe where you populate them with your with creations and you know everything about them and you have complete qudra over them and you can punish them for future eternity and so on and so forth. Because if you think that this is possible in Jannah independently, you cannot guarantee, you cannot be secure that you are not living in such a Jannah of a dependent being. Maybe your God is a dependent being who who was once a man and then he got upgraded. This is Mormonism, right? So I believe that this situation is not possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I reference هو الأول والآخر والظاهر والباطن, and the word al-zahir means the dominance that is apparent. And this scenario, exactly this scenario, which for some reason Sheikh Yasser did not catch, is exactly dealt with by Imam al-Maturidi, as we're gonna see in the slides. So going on to Imam al-Huda Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, you see this is his tafsir. It is of the Surah Al-Mulk, verse 19. He's arguing in the background of this specific screenshot that I gave that human beings cannot have creative powers. What is his argument? He says, well, if you allow creative powers for human beings, it would then be permissible, permitted. الله عز وجل أقدر ملكا من ملائكته وقواه على خلق السماوات والأرض. It would become permissible, well, that God created an angel and empowered that angel to create the heavens and the earth. And look at the deficiency that he understands with this scenario. He says, if this was possible, then in the creation, the dalala of Allah Azza wa Jal's wisdom, His qudra, His unity, His tawheed, would basically vanish. Which obviously validates my point that the deficiency in case of Allah Azza wa Jal is not limited to independence, it is more And then another reference from Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi that I didn't give in my original talk. I just hinted towards it, but now you have it in Arabic. It is somewhere in Surah An-Nisa, verse 115 or 116. I'm not exactly remembering that, but you can look it up. And this is a proof against those who say that Ibn Taymiyyah's categorization of Tawheed was a bid'ah. My position is that I'm not a fan of Ibn Taymiyyah's second phase theology when it comes to creation ex materia, when it's come to spatial measure, and these kind of things that he fell into. But when it comes to the issue of categorization of shirk into يعني ibadah, tawheed into ibadah and rububiyyah, it is something unproblematic, and people before him have given that formulation. And I have also noticed that his core key opponents, like Subki and people after him who were very eager to find his faults and gather them, like Hafiz Abu Sa'id al-Allai, and they have passages where they list everything wrong with him from the triple talaq to whatever. Okay, those people somehow do not mention the issue of categorization of Tawheed, which means that problematization of the categorization is a recent phenomena. It is amongst the Asharis only for, let's say, a few years. It's not intrinsically problematic. You see in front of you Imam al-Maturidi mentioning يحتمل الشرك في الاعتقاد وهو أن يشرك غيره في ربوبيته وألوهيته والثاني أن يشرك غيره في عبادته وذلك كله شرك بالله تعالى. Right? So Al-Maturidi is clearly saying that shirk can be in ibadah, it can also be in worship, or sorry, in rububiyyah and uluhiyyah. He might have different understanding of uluhiyyah, but that's a different thing. But he clearly is giving the similar categorization. And so, what is really the beef with Ibn Taymiyyah, right? So that wraps up this point. The other point is that I said that when it comes to shirk fil i'tiqad, that is independent of context, rationally impossible. However, when it comes to and also rational impossibility has two kind of levels, and you will see this in Sanusi's Sharaf Muqaddimat. Some people think that rational impossibility always means squared circle. No. There are some things which you can do tasawwur of. Square circle you cannot do even the tasawwur of. But there are some things you can do tasawwur of, but in the ta'ammul, that upon reflection you see the rational impossibility. Like, let's say, multiple creators. You can do tasawwur of multiple creators, but when you reflect upon it, you will see this is impossible. So I believe shirk in i'tiqad is impossible in the actual world. However, when it comes to the actions that indicate that shirk, this is context dependent. This is heavily context dependent. And there, the main thing is that what needs to be seen is whether someone's actions point out to his aqidah with labs, shubha. These are the terms that are used in fiqh, which means with ambiguity or with multiplicity of possibilities. In that case, this is takfir and shirk is not established. But if it is established without any ambiguity, without labs, then the person is going to be judged as a mushrik, and he would be guilty of shirk in the lies as well, right? And when we say it is impossible for a certain action to have a different, or let's say a different belief, for example, it's impossible for someone to insult the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in clear words without being drugged and without being forced. and that it's impossible for him to have iman in his heart. This impossibility is the impossibility under normal circumstances. It's not logical impossibility. And many of these ahkam are based on normal circumstances. Let's say, as I mentioned, I think maybe I didn't, that, for example, Imam Sarakhsi argues that a person gives testimony in two different places, in two different cities, in a way that, it's impossible to travel between them. We're not going to suppose miracle. We're going to suppose that this is the testimony is batil, right? So this impossibility is basically impossibility under normal circumstances. But the key point is that many of these people give this, are like Sheikh Yasir al-Hanafi and these people, they give the argument that, look, the definition of ibadah that has been given by Al-Razi and many others is deficient. This deficient definition is not working because you stand in front of your parents, you have veneration of them, but and that is not ibadah. However, if you sit in a certain formation and you whistle and clap, there is no fear in it, there is no veneration in it, but it is ibadah. So then they say, well, it means the deciding factor has to be ma'rifah of rububiyyah. But I say no, it doesn't have to be the deciding factor. The deciding factor here is that uh, that this definition, you are applying it in a wrong way. You have to apply it in the correct way. The correct understanding of this definition is not related to outward feeling. It is related to the dalala of the af'al, because the outward the is the believing someone to be worthy of worship is an aqidah, is an i'tiqad. And if sitting in a certain formation, clapping and whistling is a certain indicator of that belief in a certain custom, that would be shirk. Now, some of these people, like Sheikhauni and these people, they're gonna say, for example, the example of someone, let's say a sultan tells you, you're gonna pray 5 times a day in front of my home, and you're gonna direct that ibadah to me, and I'm gonna give you money. And there is no ikrah involved, like which is more tabar. They would say that this person who does this is going to be considered a kafir because of istighfaf, because he has belittled the deen. But many of the Ahlul Sunnah had no problem in considering it major shirk or shirk, right? Which means that their claim that they're representing Ahlul Sunnah, and always naming Asharis and Maturidis also in with them is not correct. So I will share with you some citations to that effect from Maulana Qasim Nanotwi and also from Imam Abu Mansur al-Maturidi himself. So this is the uh, quote of Maulana Qasim Nanotwi, where he says that all the other actions, if they are done to please someone else, then you have to still check the niyyah, whether it was done for worship or not. But for salah and hajj, you don't have to check the niyyah. And they are shirk even without the niyyah. Now, my point would be that this is because salah as a sequence, it cannot have any other meaning. It does not have ambiguity. It cannot be used for welcoming, and so this is shirk. Another example of this is found in the book called Al-Fawaid of Ar-Rustukhfani, who is the student of Al-Maturidi. And Imam Rustukhfani actually, in this reference, is quoting Abu Mansur al-Maturidi on an issue, which is that can someone, let's say, elongate his salah because he's waiting for other people to join, and why is it not shirk? And the gist of the citation, if I explain, is basically, and you can find the citation I already put in the video, so you just take a screenshot and find it in the Fawaid. The gist of it is that, look, there is a difference between إشراك في عمل في عبادة, that you do shirk in one action of ibadah, and there is a different, and the other thing is shirk في التوحيد or في العبادة itself. Meaning, a person who prays the salah, he knows it is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then in the middle, his mind goes towards the riyah. This person is guilty of shirk asghar, okay? Not shirk akbar. However, if this person, uh, because of money or because of uh, whatever, for money, this is exactly what Al-Maturidi mentioned, that he praised the entire salah to a person with the riasa and with the status, and he fears him and he seeks reward from him. This is shirk akbar. So this is an important citation to keep in mind. Finally, I missed mentioning some things about Sheikh Auni's understanding that he puts out in his book Mafhum Shirk al-Ibadah. So I will just go through them briefly, um, because I didn't have time in the original one to actually, with Daniel, to actually put the exact screenshots of Sheikh Auni's writings, but I can do it here. So this is um, Mafhum Shirk al-Ibadah of Sheikh Hatim al-Auni. So what he's arguing in this screenshot is that if the pagans did not see the talazum, the entailment between rububiyyah and worship, and they did not ascribe the rububiyyah to their deities, then it would be very easy for them to circumvent or to go around or defeat the arguments of the Quran by saying that, well, in our madhab, in our understanding, the utmost veneration can be done for someone who is not a Rab. And by this excuse, they would simply defeat all the Quranic arguments. And that is why Sheikhani says that this is not possible. So he says, no, pagans must have abided by the talazum. And this leads him to make the claim that according to Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, أن حجة المشركين على إبادة آلهتهم منحصرة في شيء واحد. And he's attributing this to Tabari, that the the shirk of the pagans, their justification was munhasira in one thing, which is that their deities create or partner in the creation, right? Now, how to address these two claims? First is that no, the pagans, they cannot easily circumvent this point. Why? Because the whole point of the hujjah is to bring someone to the level of mukabara. Mukabara is when someone goes against his basic intuitions, right? And the other thing Sheikh Oni does not understand is that pagans knew the talazum, they didn't affirm it. There's a difference between understanding that something works a certain way and affirming that. So pagans knew that the utmost worship should belong to the Rabb. Why did they know that? Because this is how the world works. You are not going to fear your slave as much you are going to fear your supervisor. This is how their experience was working, right? And they cannot reject it. And that is the point of Surah Ar-Rum, verse 28, and that destroys the argument of Sheikh Hatim Maloni. That ayah, which I quoted, كَخِيفَتِكُمْ أَنفُسِكُمْ, where Allah Azza wa Jal argues that in your experience, do you really fear the people who are equal, like who are your slaves? Do you really feel them equal as the one who are equal to you? No, no. And that argument can only be given to someone who recognizes the rububiyyah but does not direct the worship to that Rabb. And that is exactly what Imam at-Tabari noticed in that ayah. And I challenge all of them to prove to me that the opinion they attribute to Tabari is correct. It is completely wrong. And I will show you one quotation, and there are many, where Imam at-Tabari is very, very clear that most of the mushrikun among the Arabs, they did not believe that their deities create. So this verse is uh, under وَمَا نَحْنُ بِمُعَذَّبِينَ. And this is the issue of the people of Hud alayhi salam. However, Imam at-Tabari mentioned that this sentence means not that they didn't believe that there is a Rabb who can punish them. Rather, they acknowledged that there is a Rabb who can punish them. Right? Look, and then he refers what he thinks about the shirk of mushrikun of the Arabs. ولكنهم كانوا مقرين بالصانع ويعبدون الآلهة على نحو ما كان مشرك العرب يعبدونها ويقولون إنها تقربنا إلى الله زلفى. Now someone can say, "Oh, they actually, كانوا مقرين." They acknowledged the Sane, but they believed that deities were partners in the creation, according to Tabari. No, no. The shirk that Imam al-Tabari is recognizing is the shirk of taqrib. Shirk of taqrib does not imply partnering in creation. Why? Yani, have some justice. Have some justice. So that is Imam Ibn Jarir al-Tabari. And even more shocking is the claim that Sheikh Auni, if, in the start of his book, I have his book somewhere, um, I highlighted it, but let's uh, let's leave it that. Um, in the start of his book, he quotes all of these ayat where Allah Azza wa Jalla says, "If you were to ask Him who created the heavens and the earth, they will surely say Allah," which the Ummah and the Mufassirun have always understood as, in the plain sense, yes, they believe that Allah Azza wa Jalla is the only Khaliq. But Shaykh Auni says, no, these ayah mean the exact opposite. Exact opposite, that pagans believe that their deities create, which is really strange. This, what you see in front of your screen, is the tafsir of Yahya bin Salam or Salam. The person died in 200 Hijri. He's the student of Salaf, also probably the student of Imam Malik rahimahullah. His tafsir has survived. Look what he says about the tafsir. أنهم قد أقروا بأن الله خالق هذه الأشياء ثم عبدوا الأوثان من دونه. بالله عليكم, does that mean أقروا بأن الله خالق هذه الأشياء? Does that mean they still believe that pagans, like their deities, were partnering in creation? Please, I don't think that is the that is justice. Okay, the last thing I want to deal with is when I mentioned that, you know, Christians or Ahlul Kitab, for example, Allah Azza wa Jal in general, he uses the word al-mushrik with a definite article for the um, idol worshippers. No, of course, I believe that Trinitarians are mushrikun. And, there's no doubt about that. The point I wanted to make is just an analogy. And the point of the analogy was that, for example, some idol worshiper who believes that his deity is just an intermediary, maybe his shirk is lesser than the shirk of a Trinitarian who believes that in a Son of God, right? From the aqid, from a belief perspective, okay? Even though both are major shirk. But as far as the legal ruling is concerned, the ruling of idol worshipper is more severe than the ruling of Trinitarian. It's clear. So my point from the example was that the mayar, the criteria of legal takfir, is not necessarily the belief of the person. The mayar of the legal ruling is what he manifests. And this means that, this explains why some of the ulama, they have some ibarat, some sentences where they say that, look, some of the awam, they don't have these concepts, detailed concepts of istiqlal and dependence and ta'thir. No, many of them, their worldview is that I have a need, I'm going to go to that Pir Saab, I give it to him. Now it is Pir Saab's job. If I get my thing fulfilled, the credit goes to the Pir Saab or the person in the grave. And if it's not being fulfilled, it is that Pir Saab was not happy with me, right? Or there was something wrong with my veneration of him and my humiliation towards him. Okay? Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi says, this mindset, if this is not shirk, then what the hell is shirk? This is shirk. However, it is something that is not apparent in the formal sense that someone is going to describe his belief in this in a certain way. It's just something that is i'tiqad, tawakkul, or something like that. So he would say that some of these awam are guilty of shirk, but there is no proof that we can um, legally catch some of these people in the legal net because the ma'yar for legal takfir is different. And that is why I mentioned the case of Imam Shafi'ullah. When he refers to some of these people, he says, Munafiqi hadhi al-ummah. Munafiq means someone who you cannot legally takfir him, right? That is the meaning of Munafiqi hadhi al-ummah. Now, it is not possible for us to say for a specific person, this person is Munafiq because we don't know his heart, right? But it's possible to say umuman, that so and so people could be munafiqeen. That is possible without yani ta'yin. It's possible. So that was the point with the quote of Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi rahimahullah that I'm going to share on my screen now. So the people who are interested, they can look into this issue, and it's in Urdu. I'm not going to speak, basically read in Urdu and translate because I have mentioned you the gist of it about this issue of awam. But even more interesting on this issue is another citation, which is from Abu Salama al-Maturidi, who is one of the fuqaha, early Maturidi faqih. He came across Karamiya, who were actually Mujassima, and he says that to me, these people, their belief is no different from the Abadatul Awthan, from the idol worshippers. And he also partially applied some rulings on them, saying that, I'm not going to allow them to expand their masajid. But he was asked, okay, why didn't you throw jizya and so on and so forth? He said, due to the zahir of shahada. Okay. You can find this reference in Sharhul Jumal in Usul al-Din. What's the point? That there are people that the zahir of shahada doesn't help them. Like Qadiani, like people who believe explicitly in the deity, or they do inkar of the Shariah. But there are people lesser than that. And you can say that amongst them are those people who, in front of Allah, are disbelievers, or they're umuman, without doing ta'yin. You can say that. But their zahir of shahada protects them. And this is important because you see, the Wahhabis, they don't understand the whole concept of zahir of shahada. Because this hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam appears in this context that some variation of the hadith say وَحِسَابُهُمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ, which means that I'm gonna fight the people until they give this testimony, and then their hisab is with Allah, which means that I'm not responsible, and I'm not gonna go into their i'tiqad, you know inside every person. Which means if you see some Quburi, who's doing dodgy stuff, but he somehow misses that benchmark of legal takfir, we cannot takfir him. No, we cannot say that. Okay, so this was the exact point, that you have to understand the philosophy of legal ruling, Islam. That this is linked with the zahir of the testimony. And the problem with the Khawarij that is identified in the hadith is يَقْتُلُونَ أَهْلَ الْإِسْلَامِ. Ahl al-Islam, obviously for us, Muslim, Islam and Iman is the same, but in the law, Islam and Iman can be different. Someone is a Muslim, but in the law, he's not a Muslim. So the hadith saying يَقْتُلُونَ أَهْلَ الْإِسْلَامِ means the fundamental problem of Khawarij, number one, they don't have depth because the Quran does not go under their throats. That's the first problem. And that problem leads them to the consequence that they kill Ahlul Islam, which is exactly what happens with these people. They don't, because they don't understand how things work, and that's why they kill Ahlul Islam, people of the Shahada, without having a clear hujjah why those Ahlul Islam are uh, murtads. The Sahaba, when they made takfir, blanket takfir, it was on very clear cases. So that wraps up my video. And the last thing I want to do is just two references I want to give the audience that I have gathered, but maybe I said, many of the pagans they didn't believe that, or not many, but some of the pagans they didn't deny the resurrection. And I use the word al-baliyya. Look at the word al-baliyya. People may not have paid attention, but I will share the screen here to show what I actually meant. This is Al-Imam al-Khattabi rahimahullah. And he actually mentions, that it was from their madhab that they would tie a mount at the qabr, you see, and they would let it die of thirst and hunger. And he also quotes the share, وَاحْمِلْ أَبَاكَ عَلَى بَعِيرٍ صَالِحٍ وَاتَّقِ الْخِيَانَةَ إِنَّ ذَلِكَ أَصْوَبُ. Right? This is from the wasiyah of one of the pagan to his children. So why is this important? Brothers, when I mentioned the reference of Imam Abu Mansur Abdul Qahir al-Baghdadi, al-Ashari, about shirk of some of these pagans, this was a very appropriate reference because when it comes to understanding the shirk of pagans, he is the most well-positioned person because he is an adib, because many of these concepts are translated through transmitted through lugha. He's a sha'ir, he's a mutakallim, he's a mufassir, and he's has heresiologist. So this person is the most appropriate person, and you got to take his authority. And he is telling you about this category of pagans, which I covered in my original talk. And so, the modern day Asharis, they should still really, some of them, they should really think about their own tradition. The last thing I want to share is a quote from Imam Shah Abdul Aziz, rahimahullah. Maybe I don't. Okay, I lost it here somewhere. So the quote I will refer the people to look at themselves. It is found under the tafsir of in Surah Al-Baqarah. وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. This is basically in the initial, probably initial 10 pages of Surah Al-Baqarah, this ayah comes. وَإِن كُنتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عبدنا فأتوا بسورة من مثله وادعوا شهداءكم من دون الله إن كنتم صادقين. Imam Shah Abdul Aziz mentions why Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned these people as shuhada. So the verse says that, if you are in doubt about what we have revealed to our servant Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then bring your shuhada. Why did Allah Azza wa Jal use the word shuhada? You could have used a different word. Imam Shah Abdul Aziz mentioned the reason why Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned them as shuhada is because they believed that these people are omnipresent. They know everything. They hear everywhere. From wherever you're going to call them, they're going to answer your haja and they're going to fulfill it. This is a person who has used the word istiqlal in his tafsir. But you understand that these people were using istiqlal only to differentiate between the kind of partial cases of kirama from the all-encompassing ability. But when it comes to this kind of i'tiqad, someone is present everywhere, knows everything, hears everything, etc., etc., there is no excuse of istiqlal here. And finally, even the people who were first respondents against the Najdi Dawah, and they were the first line of defense, Sulaiman ibn Abdul Wahab, Uthman ibn Abdul Aziz, they also say that khasais, if you ask from other than Allah, that is shirk. That's another thing that nida we believe is not major shirk, nida itself. Okay? But the issue of nida, like calling, invocation, is again the same as dalala. In normal cases, there is a shubha. The person is saying Ya Rasulullah or something, what does he mean by it? So we have to look into it. But if he really ascribes the abilities and so on and so forth, then this is shirk. Even though we say that the nida itself is not major shirk, and this is the problem that we have a difference of opinion, that we have the Najdis and we say the Wahhabis, they believe that nida itself is shirk. And the hujjah against them are obviously some of the ahadith. One of them is that Prophet ﷺ mentioned the one who died and he did not call upon other than Allah as a nid. So there's a qualifier there, as well as the hadith where the majaz was used. So there are good evidences that why the calling itself is not major shirk, right? But calling can be considered if, let's say, if there is an urf and he's calling Krishna or something that is divinized or something, okay, that is a different thing, right? But in general, call itself is not a major shirk, you know, because actions always work as indicators in our aqidah. And even if you take the Ahlul Hadith perspective of actions being part of Iman, that point would still remain. So I hope that you like, share, and subscribe my channel. Inshallah, we would keep pumping out some interesting material. And for this specific issue, I was asked by a number of people to come on public and clarify this because there are many people who have been using the name of Asharis and Maturidis, and wallahi, they're not. They do not represent our traditions. They don't represent even atheism. They are just their own thing. You know, they have their own beliefs, and we have our problems with Wahhabis. We can, I have mentioned them, and also with Batami and those issues are other separate issues. This kind of theology that, dependency, this is not our understanding. Wallahu a'lam. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.